Today's review is going to be the Campfire Audio Io. For this review, I have to give a big thank you to the community preview program over at headphones.com. You can go over there and check out some of my written comments as well, although I haven't written them yet. They will be up there shortly. As much as everybody liked to say that this was Iron Man red, it's actually more of a maroon color. So the Io has generated some criticism that, in my opinion, isn't entirely warranted, and I'll explain why. And I'm not talking about the whole Singapore thing. I have no idea what's going on there, so I'm just not going to talk about that. I mean specifically to do with the IAM itself. Now, it isn't without its flaws. It absolutely has flaws, and some of the criticisms of the Io are totally accurate. However, these criticisms and the issues that the Io does have aren't significant enough to not recommend this at $300. So to start off with, you do get this little baggie, as is tradition with other Campfire products as well, although this one in particular looks a little bit ladylike. I legitimately felt awkward taking this out and putting the IEMs in them, and then taking them out again while I was out in public. I'm just not that ladylike. But that's fine. They happen to be that maroon color that makes this look a little bit more like a purse than anything else. Nonetheless, the IEMs themselves look quite good, the construction feels quite good, and this cable is a massive improvement over what cable they used to use for the Andromeda. The Andromeda cable, just for comparison, is this sort of thick, like triple braid system going on, whereas with the new cable from the Io, and I believe the Polaris V2 as well, it's a dual strand braid that makes it very tangle-free and easy to use. I have absolutely no problems with this change, and I really, really like it, actually. The memory wire is also gone from the top of the piece that goes around your ear. This does still stay in place reasonably well, and it's not as uncomfortable as that top piece was for the Andromeda and other IEMs from Campfire as well. The fit here is unsurprisingly excellent. They're a little bit lighter feeling than the Andromeda, but overall it's about the same. So I have nothing to complain about when it comes to any of the ergonomics. It's all excellent. Now, getting onto the sound. What is this? This is a dual balanced armature design that's been done before. This isn't new, but they are using the same acoustic chamber, or TEAC, I don't know what it all stands for, but essentially it's the acoustic chamber method that's used in the Andromeda. In practice, the way that turns out is that you get a more spacious and open sound. From a performance standpoint, this IEM is spectacular. You get all of the same detail, resolution, and speed, and all of those good things. You get a very wide and spacious and open-sounding soundstage. Before going on to the tonality, I do have to also mention that this has the balanced armature timbre, and it's more pronounced on the Io than it is on the Andromeda or most of the other balanced armature IEMs that I've ever heard. And in fact, if you don't know what that timbre concern is, listen to the Io, because it will be a little bit more prominent to you. There's this sort of shimmery, strained effect to certain types of instruments. So for example, accordions sound a bit artificial on these. I would describe it as a little bit of almost like an artificial smearing effect. But really, unless you're being picky, you probably won't notice all that much. It's not going to take away from the music that you're listening to. With that said, let's talk about the tonality. This is where the criticism lies. And I've seen countless posts online about they'll post a measurement of this IEM and then laugh at it. And to some extent, I understand the laughter, because this absolutely has a bizarre cut right between 2 and 3K that just shouldn't be there, causing certain types of music, certain qualities in some music to sound a little bit hollow. Specifically, female vocals can sound a little bit toy-like. And then keep in mind that you have this crazy soundstage on here that, as much as it's a really nice quality to have, that almost makes it so that that's more pronounced. Maybe the tonality here also does have an effect on the soundstage, and that's probably why that's why it's perceived that way a little bit more. But nonetheless, that's certainly a problem area. But before jumping into that criticism specifically, let me talk a little bit about the rest of the tonality, because when if you don't look at a frequency response graph and you just wear these, it actually sounds remarkably good. Like, it sounds better than $1,000 IEMs that I've tried. I was kind of expecting to hate this given what I knew about the frequency response, but I really don't. It sounds way better than it measures. There's no bass emphasis here that causes it to be bloated or boomy or anything like that. And the lower mid-range is fine. There's a little bit of a dip there as it goes down, so it's not perfectly even, but it's still totally fine. There's enough presence, and it feels like there's good clarity there. And in the treble, this IEM is absolutely incredible. It's, in my opinion, it does better than the Vega, and that's saying a lot. And technically speaking, in my opinion, I prefer this treble even to the treble of the Atlas, because that one, it's a little bit sharper. But some people may prefer that, and it does perform better, so that's a different story. But the fact that the treble on the Io can do just as good as $1,000 IEMs is remarkable. And it is admittedly just a little bit north of where I want it to be. But the reason why the treble here is so good in comparison to some of the other IEMs, not just from Campfire, but most IEMs, is that first, IEMs below $1,000 tend to roll off in the treble quite a bit, and they roll off a little too early. In fact, the IO also does roll off, but it's beyond 12K, so there really isn't a big deal there. And usually I see it much earlier, like before 10K even, and that's a problem. So the fact that it doesn't roll off that early is a good thing for starters. But then beyond that, I find that with most IEMs, when they do try and emphasize a little bit of treble presence, apart from the Andromeda, of course, they have a tendency to elevate lower than where it should. You see this on the Polaris and the Vega and even the Atlas, where the treble rises up closer to 7K, 6K. So the splash and treble presence sounds almost a little bit compressed, even though it's sharp at the same time. And with the Io, it doesn't. It rises closer to 8K, in fact, between 8 and 9K, which makes it so that that sibilance area is not harsh. It's still, again, slightly north of where I want it to be, because I am a little bit sensitive to that. It's definitely a little bit bright. But it's no DT990 or anything like that. It doesn't have that weird over-sharpening kind of grain thing going on. So the fact that this comes up at a more appropriate place and then also doesn't roll off as early is a huge win for the Io. Now, let's get to where this sucks. And I actually think that this criticism here, while it looks ridiculous and the criticism itself is pointed at the right thing, that 2 to 3K dip is right around where the ear canal and eardrum resonance and amplification occurs when considering how a flat speaker would measure in a room, how that measures at the ear, or in the ear in this case. So it should have a rise there, and it doesn't. Or it should be elevated there, and it isn't. But there is room for subjectivity in here. And I've been critical about IEMs that go the other way. And of course, maybe this contradicts that a little bit, because I was so harsh about something like the CL2, for example, which is just super elevated between like 3 and 5K hertz. Unreasonably so. But the point is that not everybody is going to have the same amount of ear canal and eardrum gain / amplification. And so what might sound totally hollow and just gone for some people is not actually going to be as bad for others. And of course it's not right, but it's better to be on that end than the over sharpened end. So, which again, I don't think this was tuned intentionally this way. I don't think it was deliberate to cut out between 2 and 3K so strongly. I think it's just where the two drivers happen to cross over. The experience of that dip will vary from person to person. Now, the other main point is that when there are these kinds of issues, errors of a dip or a peak or whatever, they're way more obvious in the treble than they are in the upper mid-range. So if that had been at 5K hertz, I feel like this would be in a much bigger problem. But because it's at 2 to 3K hertz, it really isn't as noticeable. It's not like when you first listen to it, you immediately hear this as a flaw. It's only after a while, when you're specifically listening to like female vocals, that things can start to sound a little bit strange, but that's not without incredible clarity and detail. So, I've heard countless IEMs that make way bigger errors, again, for my ear canal, than this does. Like, for example, the CL2. I don't think most people, when they hear this, will notice it. Now, I have to also mention with the Soundstage, while it is wide and spacious and open sounding, vocals specifically are a little bit forward. They're actually to the point where they sit more in your head than positioned in front of you. And the rest of the band or whatever instruments or the accompaniment is, placed where it should be. And so that can throw people for a loop. I know for me, I was a little bit put off by that at first, but I kind of grew used to that, and it's not really that big a deal in my opinion, especially given that the clarity and detail and speed and all these other performance qualities are all excellent. So the bottom line for the Campfire Io is that while there are very valid criticisms, they're not in the parts of the frequency response that are going to contribute to major deal breakers. These are not going to be flaws that when you first listen to this IEM, you go, I can't deal with this. It's the kind of thing where after a long time, you may realize that's maybe not quite right because it's missing a bit of presence in whatever vocal quality. As far as whether or not I recommend this, at $300, I've never heard treble this good. Maybe there is, and I mean this very seriously. Like I just haven't heard it at $300 from an IEM. However, the IO still has one problem, and it's that the Etymotic ER4SR and 4XR are both around $350, and I think they're even on sale right now for a little bit cheaper. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't like that crazy deep insertion technique for the Etymotic stuff, and you're sold on Campfire's fit and design, then yes, I do recommend this. But if you're okay with that Etymotic style of the deep ear insertion, I still probably would recommend that one. I had said in my Brainwaves B400 review that it's kind of like a benchmark for frequency response at the $200 range. And so the question for a lot of IEMs for me is it at least as good as that one? And the Campfire Io is clearly better in terms of its performance qualities, its treble performance. Its bass performance is better. It's just that weird cutout part in the mid-range. It's just totally messed up. But that is a concession I'd be willing to make for the performance that you get, the speed, the detail, etc. from the IO. The closest other Campfire Audio IEM that this reminds me of is actually the Jupiter. And I know that's a much more expensive IEM, but the Jupiter also was missing a bit of mid-range presence there that the Andromeda fixed, in my opinion. So the Andromeda is clearly the better IEM by far. It's not even close. But the Io is closer to that of the Andromeda and the Jupiter than it is to the Polaris and the Vega and the Atlas. So if that makes sense. And in some ways, this may have been Campfire's attempt at getting a more neutral frequency response because, again, on balance, it's a fairly neutral, it's slightly counterclockwise tilted with a little bit more energy in the treble, but not in a bad way. There are IEMs and headphones that do it in a bad way, and this is not that. This has exceptional treble resolution and detail and clarity. So in conclusion, do I recommend the Campfire Io? Yes and no. On the one hand, it does treble better than anything I've heard under $300, confidently. The treble is exceptional here. Additionally, the bass is also excellent. It's not bloated, it's not overemphasized, it's the right amount of bass, it's controlled, and it's punchy. It feels great. On the other hand, the mid-range is wrong to the point where you may find that some of the vocals for your music can sound a little bit dry and hollow, but for the most part, it's really not that bad. And that ultimately is the story of the Io. It's that it makes these errors in the upper mid-range and does so much else good at this price point Unfortunately, it's got this sort of reputation as having a bonkers frequency response, but if you walked into a store and you just tried these without knowing what they were or what frequency response was associated with it, you would enjoy this. I would still get the Etymotic stuff, the ER4XR and whatnot, but that doesn't fit everybody. And this is still an upgrade over what I consider to be the $200 benchmark. So while it does have some stiff competition at $300, I do still recommend this for people looking for exceptional treble response, a good spacious soundstage, well-controlled and well-defined bass, and not this V-shaped overbloated stuff. People need to just listen to this first before making up their conclusions.